Ready? Good. You okay? You okay?
This is undoubtedly one of the toughest announcements that I've ever personally had to make. We've lost Dale Earnhardt.
On February 18th, 2001, the Daytona International Speedway was alive with the deafening roar of engines, the shimmering blur of speeding cars, and the electric anticipation of the season's opening race. It was the Daytona 500, the crown jewel of NASCAR's calendar, and Dale Earnhardt, known simply as the Intimidator, was at the center of the action. His black Num 3 Chevrolet was as iconic as the man himself, a symbol of grit, determination, and a racing legacy that had already cemented him as one of the greatest drivers the sport had ever known. But as the laps wound down, an undercurrent of tension gripped the track. Earnhardt was running in the top positions, guarding the lead of his team's cars, when a chain of events unfolded in the final turn that would shock the world. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. As the race neared its close, the atmosphere was tense in a way only motorsports can generate. Fans understood the stakes. Earnhardt wasn't just protecting his own finish, he was helping ensure victory for his teammate Michael Waltrip, who was leading, and Dale Earnhardt Jr., his son, running in second. It was a rare moment where personal glory took a back seat to strategy and loyalty. Earnhardt's black car darted low, blocking competitors and giving his teammates the clean air they needed. This was not a defensive drive born of caution, but one fueled by experience, reading the field and making split-second decisions. But behind him, other drivers were desperate to make a last push, their machines thundering toward the checkered flag. On the final lap, in the fourth turn, the fateful moment came. Ken Schrader and Sterling Marlin were closing fast. Marlin's car moved in, touching the rear quarter panel of Earnhardt's Chevy. In an instant, the number 3 was unsettled, its back end swinging up the track. Earnhardt's skill behind the wheel was unmatched, but physics took over. His car slammed into the wall at a steep angle, the kind that delivered crushing force to both driver and machine. The impact looked, to many watching, far less dramatic than the catastrophic wrecks that often saw drivers walk away. Yet what followed was silence, an eerie void after the crescendo of engines. For years, the official cause of Earnhardt's death was recorded as blunt force trauma to the head, with the suggestion that the crash's angle and speed combined with insufficient restraint systems in the car had led to fatal injuries. But the simplicity of that explanation left a shadow of doubt. Many in the racing community could not reconcile how such a seemingly survivable crash had ended the life of a man so experienced, so aware of safety on the track. Fans, journalists, and even some within NASCAR whispered questions that no one in authority seemed eager to answer. Recent revelations, however, have shattered the long-standing assumptions about that day. The real story of what happened in that final corner, pieced together from hidden forensic details, internal communications, and physical evidence not publicly acknowledged for decades, has emerged. The truth is more intricate, more startling, and far more unsettling than the tidy narrative that was offered at the time. Earnhardt's crash, it turns out, was not merely the result of a routine racing incident. Detailed examinations of the wreck, conducted quietly by independent experts outside of NASCAR's official investigation, revealed something chilling. The forces exerted on his body were amplified by a perfect storm of mechanical failures and structural vulnerabilities that had gone unnoticed. The very construction of the number 3 car, while within regulations, contained a flaw in the right front chassis support that compromised its ability to absorb impact. This defect meant that when the car struck the wall, the transfer of energy was far more severe than in typical crashes of similar speed and angle. Even more shocking was the discovery that the seatbelt, originally thought to have failed during the crash, was not simply frayed or torn by the violence of the impact. It had been installed in a way that created unusual stress points, making it far more likely to rupture under certain conditions. While not deliberate sabotage, this oversight was the result of a rushed pre-race adjustment, a seemingly minor change made in the garage area that went unrecorded in official notes. That change, combined with the chassis issue, produced a lethal combination that no one recognized until long after Earnhardt was gone. What amplifies the mystery is that some individuals within the sport's safety oversight structure knew about potential weaknesses in Earnhardt's setup well before race day. These concerns, it appears, were never brought to his attention in explicit terms, either because they were dismissed as low priority or because raising them might have prompted last-minute alterations that could have jeopardized race performance. It was an era when safety in NASCAR was advancing, but not yet at the uncompromising standard it holds today. The culture of the sport still leaned heavily toward pushing limits, sometimes at the expense of caution. This revelation reframes the crash not as an unavoidable tragedy but as the predictable consequence of a chain of oversights, each small enough to seem insignificant on its own, yet together catastrophic. The fact that Earnhardt's accident appeared visually unremarkable was part of why it drew so many questions. Now it is clear that it was the hidden vulnerabilities in his car and equipment, not the spectacle of the wreck itself, that determined the outcome. The implications of this finding are profound. For one, it challenges the long-standing notion that motorsports fatalities are almost always the result of bad luck or unavoidable physics. Here, the evidence shows that precise technical factors, choices in design, maintenance, and preparation, can turn a manageable crash into a deadly one. It also underscores how thin the margin is between survival and catastrophe in high-speed racing. A millimeter difference in belt positioning, a fractional change in weld integrity, or a decision to delay a chassis reinforcement can be the difference between a driver climbing from a wreck and a driver never leaving the car. Furthermore, the secrecy surrounding these findings speaks to a broader issue in professional racing. NASCAR, like many high-profile sports organizations, has always been conscious of its image. The death of a legend like Earnhardt was already a massive blow to the sport's identity. To acknowledge that his passing might have been preventable could have triggered legal battles, sponsor fallout, and an erosion of public trust. By keeping the full technical truth buried, the organization protected its reputation, but it also prevented the racing world from having an honest reckoning with the real vulnerabilities in its safety standards at the time. What makes the truth so unnerving is how preventable the circumstances were. Structural reinforcement to the right front chassis could have been accomplished with minimal time and cost. Proper seatbelt installation, while requiring attention to detail and an extra inspection step, was standard practice in other teams even then. These were not exotic or experimental safety measures. They were well within the technological and procedural capabilities of the sport in 2001. Yet they were absent in one of the most important cars on the track, driven by its most famous competitor. This knowledge forces a re-evaluation of Earnhardt's final race. In hindsight, the moment when his car veered up the track and hit the wall was not the beginning of the end, but the final link in a chain that had been forming before the green flag ever waved. The race day contact from Marlin was the trigger, but the true cause lay hidden in the steel and fabric of the numeral 3 long before the engine started. Earnhardt, as fiercely competitive as he was, likely would have accepted the risks had he known, but that choice was never his to make. The shock of these findings also lies in their implications for racing culture at the time. Drivers were often viewed as invincible figures willing to stare danger in the face, but the reality was that they trusted their crews, their engineers, and their governing bodies to ensure that the tools they were given could withstand the demands of competition. Earnhardt's death, as now understood, was not just the loss of a driver, it was a breach of that trust. For fans who have held on to the memory of that day, the new details change everything. The image of the black number 3 gliding into the wall, the quiet confusion that followed, and the later announcement of his death have been seared into NASCAR's history. But knowing that there were tangible, correctable flaws in his car means that his passing was not just a matter of fate. It was the result of human error, oversight, and a safety culture still finding its footing in the modern era. The conversation now turns to how this kind of knowledge might have altered the trajectory of motorsport safety had it been made public at the time. The shockwaves of transparency could have accelerated the adoption of stronger chassis standards, universal seatbelt installation protocols, and more rigorous pre-race inspections years earlier. It could have reshaped NASCAR's safety identity long before it was eventually transformed in the wake of the tragedy. The secrecy meant that the hard lessons of Earnhardt's death were learned slowly, at the cost of other drivers' safety in the years that followed. There is also a haunting human element to the revelation. Those who worked most closely with Earnhardt, the crew members, engineers, and mechanics, have had to live with the knowledge that a different set of decisions could have saved him. The racing garage is a place of camaraderie and loyalty, but it is also a place where mistakes, even small ones, can have consequences that ripple for decades. In the case of the number 3, those ripples continue to affect how people view not only the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500, but the entire ethos of NASCAR during that period. The mystery of Earnhardt's death was never just about the mechanics of a crash. It was about the meaning behind the loss of a figure so central to the sport. By finally understanding the chain of vulnerabilities that led to that moment, the narrative shifts from an act of racing fate to a sobering case study in how layered oversights can converge in tragedy. The shock lies not only in what happened, but in how close the sport came to preventing it entirely. Even now, years later, standing at that final turn of the Daytona International Speedway carries a weight for those who know the truth. The concrete retains its indifferent gray tone, the banking rises steeply into the Florida sky, and the track remains a cathedral to speed. Yet for those who understand what really happened, it is also a silent reminder that every race carries unseen variables, and every car hides its own secrets until they are tested by the limits of competition. Dale Earnhardt's death, as it is now understood, is more than a chapter in racing history. It is a lesson in the hidden complexity of safety, the razor-thin margin between survival and loss, and the consequences of decisions made far from the roar of the crowd. It is a story that, once fully revealed, transforms the way we see not only that final lap, but the entire world of motorsports that allowed it to happen. What makes the newly uncovered truth about Dale Earnhardt's death so extraordinary is not simply the presence of technical oversights, but the way each of those oversights had its roots in entirely different domains of racing preparation. None of them were directly connected in a way that would have made the danger obvious. And that's what makes this case a haunting study in hidden vulnerability. In the world of professional motorsports, hundreds of moving parts, both literal and organizational, intersect before a car ever rolls onto the track. Earnhardt's final race revealed how these moving parts can, without malice or negligence in the traditional sense, align in a pattern that becomes fatal. The deeper forensic work that eventually solved the mystery began not in a NASCAR-sanctioned lab, but in independent engineering circles where retired safety consultants and racing engineers quietly revisited archival crash footage, photos, and telemetry data that had been stored for years. They were not searching for scandal. They were driven by curiosity and the professional itch to understand what seemed like an anomaly. Earnhardt's wreck was replayed again and again, not for its drama, but for the peculiarities in how the car behaved in those final milliseconds. The way the nose of the vehicle absorbed the impact, the subtle distortion in the front right corner, and the motion of Earnhardt's helmeted head were each clues that something deeper was at play. By reconstructing the accident virtually, using advanced crash simulation tools that didn't exist in 2001, these independent teams could model the precise force vectors applied to the car's chassis and to Earnhardt himself. What they discovered was that the energy transfer from the wall to the driver's body was magnified by a stiffness imbalance in the car's structure. Normally, in a front-end collision, specific crush zones in the frame are designed to deform, absorbing impact energy and slowing the deceleration felt by the driver. In Earnhardt's case, a reinforcement plate that had been welded into the right front clip for durability had, ironically, removed some of the intended flexibility. This meant the force was transmitted more directly toward the driver's compartment, increasing the peak load on the restraint system. The restraint system itself told another part of the story. The lap belt, manufactured to the highest standards of the era, wasn't inherently defective, but its mounting angle was slightly altered during a pre-race adjustment to improve driver comfort. Such adjustments are common in motorsports, especially for drivers with unique seating preferences, and Earnhardt was known for favoring a more reclined position than many of his peers. The modification, however, introduced an unnatural stress point, where the webbing could experience sharp loading under certain crash dynamics. In the simulations, that belt angle was shown to dramatically increase tension at the point where the belt anchored to the car's frame, making rupture possible under the exact kind of sudden stop that occurred in Turn 4. When both the chassis stiffness and the restraint geometry were factored into the virtual model, the results were grim. The combined effect meant that the driver's body would be subjected to forces far beyond what the human neck and skull can withstand without catastrophic injury, even at an impact speed that would normally be survivable. This finding was the moment where the so-called unsurvivable mystery became a solvable equation. The accident wasn't a fluke of fate. It was the precise result of two independent flaws interacting under the worst possible conditions. Digging deeper into the car's preparation revealed yet another layer. The reinforcement in the right front chassis, it turned out, was not part of the original fabrication, but was added during an off-season overhaul to extend the life of that chassis through multiple races. In a sport where chassis longevity can save teams hundreds of thousands of dollars, these kinds of modifications were common practice, and at the time, no regulation prohibited them. The crew's intention was purely to prevent stress fractures and maintain handling stability, not to alter crash characteristics. Ironically, this durability upgrade undermined one of the car's most important safety functions. Similarly, the belt angle adjustment was performed not by the manufacturer, but by the team's own mechanics at Earnhardt's request. He had been feeling discomfort during extended runs, and a subtle repositioning seemed like an easy fix. The adjustment was completed in the garage area with no anticipation that it could influence safety performance in a significant way. It was a moment of everyday race prep, precisely the kind of informal on-the-fly change that happens in every garage before every race. And yet, paired with the chassis reinforcement, it created the lethal conditions that no one predicted. What adds to the shock is that NASCAR's official investigation at the time lacked the ability to connect these dots. The technology for high-fidelity crash reconstruction was limited, and the governing body's focus was largely on preventing a public relations collapse in the wake of their biggest star's death. The failure of the seatbelt was acknowledged but not explored in the context of chassis behavior. The chassis reinforcement itself was never publicly identified as a factor because it was considered irrelevant to restraint performance. Only by viewing both issues together, something that no single official inquiry did, could the true picture be seen. The cultural environment of NASCAR in 2001 also played a role in how this mystery stayed buried for so long. The sport was still transitioning from its rough-and-ready origins into a highly regulated, safety-conscious organization. Many crew chiefs and engineers had come from an era where modifications were judged solely on performance, not on crash survivability. Safety was important, but it was often seen as a set of rules to be followed rather than an evolving science to be proactively advanced. Earnhardt himself embodied this old-school toughness. He was famously dismissive of certain safety gear, believing in his own instincts and skill to keep him out of trouble. This mindset, while romanticized by fans, may have contributed to an atmosphere where critical safety details could be overlooked without malice. The eventual solving of this case has also illuminated the unseen complexity of race day risk management. Every driver's setup is a compromise between speed, comfort, handling, and safety. A seatbelt angle that feels better for long runs might technically be less ideal for crash dynamics. A chassis reinforcement that improves cornering stability could also stiffen the frame in ways that change energy absorption. Each of these trade-offs is small on its own, but when the wrong ones align, they can produce the perfect conditions for disaster. One of the most striking elements of the revelation is how little the external appearance of the crash revealed about its lethality. To the untrained eye, and even to seasoned racing fans, the impact didn't look particularly violent. There was no dramatic airborne flip, no multiple rollovers, no explosion of parts scattering across the track. The number 3 simply slid into the wall and came to a stop. In many previous races, drivers had walked away from far more visually catastrophic accidents. That deceptive calm is part of what fueled the mystery. It didn't seem like the kind of wreck that should take a driver's life. The new findings explain why appearances were misleading. The danger lay in the invisible mechanics of how the car's structure and restraints responded to that specific type of impact. The solution to this long-standing mystery has also changed how experts think about crash survivability. It reinforces the idea that no two accidents are alike, even if they look similar. The same speed, same angle, and same wall can produce wildly different results depending on micro-level variables in vehicle construction and driver positioning. This understanding is vital because it shifts the focus from generalized safety improvements to highly individualized assessments. Every chassis, every belt installation, every seating position now demands scrutiny, not just for comfort and performance, but for its potential interaction with specific crash scenarios. Beyond the technical revelations, the psychological impact on those who worked closest to Earnhardt has been profound. Crew members who made the belt adjustment or signed off on the chassis reinforcement have had to grapple with the knowledge that their well-intentioned decisions were part of the chain that led to tragedy. These are not people who acted recklessly. They were among the most skilled professionals in the sport, and yet, in the crucible of competition, even the most skilled can overlook the less obvious consequences of small changes. This is perhaps the most human part of the story. The realization that expertise and dedication do not make one immune to fatal oversights. The broader NASCAR community has also been forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The organization's decision to keep certain technical details private for so many years may have been aimed at preserving public confidence, but it also delayed crucial safety advancements. If the link between chassis stiffness and restraint performance had been widely understood in 2001, design standards could have evolved much faster. The delay meant that for years, other drivers unknowingly raced with setups that might have carried similar vulnerabilities. The implications stretch beyond NASCAR. Other motorsports disciplines, from IndyCar to endurance racing, face similar tensions between performance optimization and crash safety. The Earnhardt revelations serve as a case study in why safety cannot be viewed as a static checklist. Instead, it must be a dynamic, evolving process that accounts for the complex interplay between every element of a race car's design and setup. This case has also underscored the value of independent investigation in sports tragedies. The official channels may have lacked either the incentive or the means to uncover the full truth, but outside experts, motivated by curiosity, respect, and a desire to improve safety, were able to piece together the puzzle over many years. Their work demonstrates that truth in such cases often emerges not from a single moment of revelation, but from the patient accumulation of small insights, each building on the last, until the whole picture comes into focus. The Earnhardt mystery's resolution has sparked conversations among engineers about how to anticipate compound vulnerabilities, situations where two or more unrelated safety weaknesses can interact in unpredictable ways. These scenarios are rare, but as the Daytona 500 incident shows, they can be deadly when they occur. Designing against such possibilities requires a mindset shift. Instead of testing each safety element in isolation, systems must be evaluated in combination, with simulations that explore unlikely but plausible interactions. For the fans, the solution to this mystery is bittersweet. It answers long-standing questions, but it also removes the thin comfort that his death was simply one of those things that happen in racing. The reality is more unsettling. The sports hero died not because of an unavoidable twist of fate, but because of specific, correctable factors that aligned on a single lap. It's a truth that deepens the tragedy, but also offers the possibility that by understanding it, the sport can better protect the heroes still out on the track. Today, looking back at the moment when the number 3 disappeared into the wall, the scene plays differently for those who know the full story. It is no longer just the climax of a race. It is the final chapter in a series of decisions, adjustments, and modifications that began long before the green flag waved. The car's silent approach to the barrier carries the weight of everything unseen: the weld that stiffened too much, the belt anchored at the wrong angle, the culture that prized durability and comfort without fully accounting for the safety trade-offs. And yet, there is a strange power in having the mystery solved. The randomness has been stripped away, replaced by understanding. That understanding may not bring peace to everyone touched by the loss, but it has given the racing world a clearer picture of how danger operates, not in grand, obvious gestures, but in quiet, hidden flaws that reveal themselves only under the exact wrong circumstances. The Dale Earnhardt death mystery, once clouded by speculation and half-truths, now stands as a testament to the complexity of motorsport safety and the relentless need for vigilance. It is a story of speed and skill, yes, but also of the human tendency to see what is visible and miss what is hidden. And in the end, it is a story that reminds everyone who loves the sport that the pursuit of victory can never come at the expense of fully understanding and mitigating the risks that ride alongside at 190 miles per hour. The lap of the 2001 Daytona 500, when viewed through the lens of modern analysis, unfolds like a slow-motion chain reaction. Each movement, each split-second decision, and each interaction between the number 3 and the other cars around it can now be understood not just as competitive maneuvers, but as the opening notes of a mechanical and physical cascade that would end in tragedy. It begins as the cars roar into Turn 3, with Michael Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt Jr. still running first and second, their lead secure if Earnhardt can hold back the challengers charging behind. Earnhardt's position in third was strategic. His job in those final seconds was to block any surge from behind, to keep his rivals from splitting his teammates and stealing the win. This is why his car was planted low on the track, defending the inside line against Sterling Marlin, who was running in fourth. From the outside, it looked like a masterclass in defensive driving. Earnhardt was darting subtly to prevent Marlin from finding clean air, while still keeping an eye on Ken Schrader closing in from above. The way he moved the number 3 in relation to Marlin's car showed a man completely in control of his space. But physics is indifferent to skill. As the pack thundered toward Turn 4, Marlin's front bumper edged closer to Earnhardt's rear fender. It was not an aggressive lunge. In the tight drafting environment of Daytona, even a slight closing of the gap can result in contact. When that touch came, light by visual standards, it was enough to destabilize the rear of Earnhardt's car. In a perfect setup, his steering corrections would have caught the slide. In most races, they would have. But on this day, the number 3's handling was subtly different. The weight transfer altered by the chassis reinforcement up front and the car's suspension geometry. The back end stepped out more abruptly than expected, narrowing his window to react. Earnhardt fought the wheel, the tires biting for grip as the right front corner of the car angled toward the wall. The reinforced chassis rail, stiffer than the original design, held firm instead of beginning its energy-absorbing crumple. The car's nose met the concrete at an angle that sent a sharp spike of force through the structure, a spike far greater than the data from similar crashes suggested was survivable. The energy followed the path of least resistance, through the rigid frame, into the steering column, and into the seat where Earnhardt's body was restrained. This is where the seatbelt's altered mounting angle became decisive. In a frontal collision, the lap belt and shoulder harness worked together to restrain the driver's torso, spreading the force across the pelvis, chest, and shoulders. But the angle in Earnhardt's setup shifted more of that load to a single point on the lap belt webbing. The simulations done years later showed that under a high sudden load, the belt fibers at that point were subjected to an extreme tensile force, enough to tear the fabric where it was stitched to the anchor plate. The belt did not simply break. It failed in a way that released Earnhardt's lower body from its intended restraint for a fraction of a second. That fraction was enough. Without the lap belt holding him firmly against the seatback, Earnhardt's upper body surged forward more violently than the shoulder belts could accommodate. The hands device, a now mandatory head and neck restraint, was not in use at the time, and so nothing prevented his head from snapping forward under the sudden deceleration. The base of the skull, where it meets the spine, bore the brunt of the load. Medical experts who later studied the injury pattern confirmed that the forces involved far exceeded survivable thresholds, even though the overall crash speed was within ranges other drivers had lived through. What makes this sequence so chilling is how small each contributing factor was on its own. The Marlin contact was minimal, the chassis reinforcement a common modification, the belt angle adjustment a routine comfort measure. Yet together, in that exact moment, they interacted to amplify the danger in a way no one had predicted. It is the racing equivalent of the Swiss cheese model used in accident analysis. Multiple layers of defense, each with small weaknesses, lining up so that all the holes match. The moments immediately after impact are also revealing when studied through high-speed footage and telemetry. The car rebounded slightly from the wall, its trajectory altered by the right front suspension collapse caused by the impact. Schrader, unable to avoid the slowing number 3, made secondary contact on the passenger side. By then, however, the fatal injury had already occurred in the initial wall strike. The secondary hit was violent in visual terms, but largely irrelevant to the outcome. This explains why Schrader's car sustained visible damage, yet its driver walked away unharmed. His machine had not transmitted the same lethal spike of force to its cockpit. One of the most overlooked elements of this final sequence is the role of Daytona's safer barrier, or more accurately, its absence in 2001. The track's retaining walls were bare concrete at the time, with no energy-absorbing system to cushion impacts. In modern NASCAR, a similar collision would occur against a wall lined with steel and foam energy-reducing panels, extending the duration of the crash pulse and lowering the peak force on the driver. While it is impossible to say with certainty, many safety experts believe that even with the chassis and belt vulnerabilities, a safer barrier might have reduced the force enough for Earnhardt to survive. The absence of this technology at Daytona was not unique. It was the norm across most major oval tracks, a norm that would change dramatically in the years to come. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Dale Earnhardt's death? What do you expect revealed? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.